have the rights of individuals in many respects, but they don't have to meet the standards of individuals. They get the protection that individuals get, but they can't go to jail. You can't put a corporation in jail, but you can put its leaders in jail, but we don't. For the most part, we don't.
Hi, I'm John Kiriakou, and welcome back to Deep Focus. Do you ever feel like the economic deck is stacked against you? You work hard, more than 40 hours a week, and you just can't get ahead. Inflation takes a bite, medical insurance is prohibitive, college costs, if you have kids, are astronomical. Well, maybe the deck actually is stacked against you. Maybe that's the plan. And what if you're a country and not a person? You have some economic problems for whatever reason, but then you go to the likes of the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund or Wall Street for help. You're humiliated, and essentially you're taken over. The question then isn't, is that the goal? The question is, why is that the goal? Well, we're happy to be joined today by one of the most articulate and respected voices on international economic affairs and banking who's out there. John Perkins is a highly respected author and commentator, best known for his book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, in which he describes playing a role in a process of economic colonialization of third world countries on behalf of what he describes as a cabal of corporations, banks, international financial institutions, and the U.S. government. John, thanks so much for joining us. I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
It's my pleasure to be with you, John. It's good to finally meet you, if from a distance.
Pleasure's mine. Yeah. I feel like we've known each other for a long time already. And I wanted to start, if we could, with a big picture view. I spent a lot of time at the CIA, including in countries that were economic basket cases. They all had one thing in common: massive foreign debt, exactly the kind of debt that you have warned about. Why is it then that countries as diverse as Argentina, Yemen, Greece, Pakistan, and others keep going back to the World Bank? They keep going back to the IMF or to the US or to Wall Street when they know what's going to happen to them. Why do they do that?
Well, there's a number of reasons, but perhaps the most obvious one is that their leaders benefit from that. What we might call corruption, but since it's legally not corruption. But, the people who run most of these countries are connected to, and their families own the big businesses in these countries, the things like the banks and the industries and all the merchant establishments, the big ones. And so they benefit from these debts because the debts are used to build better highways, electrical systems, airports and ports and industrial parks, things that really help them, but don't help most of the people out in the, we might call the campo, or the farmers, the people. In fact, they're hurt by this because a lot of the interest payments on the debt come from things that should go to social services. They come from funds that should be paying for education, health care, and other social services. But the wealthy and the powerful in these countries really benefit. And incidentally, they are also the ones who end up working in high places in the World Bank and the IMF. So it's their cronies calling the shots there. So it really is kind of this, what we might call it, I don't mean to sound sexist, but the old boy network, now it's an old boy girl network. And so it benefits them that way. And in addition, they get some other private perks. Like one of the things we used to offer was, if you sign this loan, we'll make sure, Mr. President, that you and your family and all your friends and their families, all your kids get into colleges in the United States, good colleges. We've got really good connections. We're a Boston-based firm, the firm I work for. We have really good connections with MIT, Harvard, Boston University, all these amazing colleges. We'll get you in and we'll give you full scholarships. And that's worth a lot of money. It's totally legal. In fact, we bragged about it. We'd tell the Boston Globe, hey, last year we gave $3 million to scholarships to people that from poor countries in Latin America. We didn't bother to mention that we gave the scholarships to the families that really didn't need them. And that's just one example of blatant corruption that is not corruption because it's totally legal. We were careful not to break any of the laws around bribery and corruption, but there were so many other ways to do it.
You wrote at length in Confessions of an Economic Hitman about the nexus between the firm where you worked and NSA, the National Security Agency. And you took a lot of heat for that, including from people in the mainstream media who said that you had made it up. In fact, though, When the New York Times went back and investigated the book, they found that you had indeed told the truth. So we know that the likes of the CIA, NSA, the FBI, and other three-letter agencies use international organizations and banks as cover. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Tell us why NSA would be so interested in having a foot in high-level international finance.
Well, all of these agencies are connected with what I like to call the corporatocracy, which is, made up of government officials and corporate presidents. And this is revolving door. So those people are often one and the same. That the people, you often get a situation where somebody in charge of regulating the oil industry came right out of working for Texaco or Chevron or somebody, and they're going to go back into that industry when they get out of government. So again, it's part of this old boy network. And so, the NSA, the CIA, the all of these agencies are so closely tied with this whole goal of corporatocratizing the world, of making the world basically a corporate empire. It's not exactly an American empire, which is interesting, because if you take like Halliburton recently moved to the Middle East and have their offices, the people of the United States don't benefit from this for the most part. There may be some benefits, but it's really a corporate global empire that's supported by the U.S. government in a very big way, even to the point of sending in troops if an oil company is threatened in Colombia. Is what happened a few years ago. The United States will actually send in troops, or they call them advisors, but they're really members of our military that go in and run things. So our government supports this, but the American people don't benefit. I mean, you can make an argument that when your country has the prominent language in the world and the dollar is the prominent currency, when I go to other countries, I benefit from that. Yes. But overall, I think we suffer. And I think we're seeing that today with a huge backlash against us in favor of China.
John, I remember sitting next to the Greek ambassador to the United States at an event back in 2008, I guess it was, at Johns Hopkins University. The Greek deputy prime minister, who was also the finance minister, was giving a presentation on what was looking to be an economic catastrophe in the making in Greece. I turned to the ambassador and I said to him, I don't see how you're going to get out of this. And he said, neither do I. So what happened was what everybody would have predicted. It was this endless cycle of negotiations between Greece and the World Bank and the IMF and the European Central Bank. They essentially took over the country. But then word leaked out that PricewaterhouseCoopers, the Greek government's auditor, had been falsifying economic records for years. Goldman Sachs was involved in the falsification of those records. But in the end, nobody from PwC or from Goldman Sachs, or for that matter, the Greek government, was ever prosecuted. And the Greeks are now indebted for generations to come to these powerful Western entities. What should have been done? Or could things have been done differently?
Well, I think Greece really became the fall boy for the catastrophe, the financial catastrophe that swept through Europe and much of the world back in the 2008, 2007, 2008, that time. And I have to say, I mean, to a certain degree, that the Greek government has to take responsibility, because there was a lot of corruption. But you've always got to ask yourself, who does the corruption? Who does the corrupting? I mean, we talk about corruption in Greece. We talk about corruption in Latin American countries and African countries. But you got to ask yourself, who's doing the corruption? I was one of those people, and I don't know whether you with the CIA got involved in that at all. But I mean, that was part of my job, was, as I mentioned before, legal corruption. And it can be done illegally too. But who's doing the corruption, and for what reason? But I think you also hit upon a very important point, which is the individuals involved, whether it's in Greece or anywhere else in the world, don't get taken down. The companies may get fined. The companies may or may not admit to guilt. Sometimes they don't admit to guilt. Sometimes they do. They get fined. They strike a deal, but nobody goes to prison. Nobody gets slapped on the wrist even, because they're protected by the corporations. And under our law, corporations are have the rights of individuals in many respects, but they don't have to meet the standards of individuals. They get the protection that individuals get, but they can't go to jail. You can't put a corporation in jail, but you can put its leaders in jail, but we don't. For the most part,
that's exactly right. In Greece, I served in Greece from 1998 to 2000, and I traveled back to Greece regularly all the time. They had a defense minister by the name of Akis Tsohadzopoulos. This guy was the definition of corruption. I remember reading in the paper that he had bought a new house, and it was directly across the street from the Parthenon. And I knew what those houses went for, right? I read the real estate section of the Greek papers. This guy makes $80,000 a year, and he buys a $6 million house. And then he's hosting parties. It's nicer than the prime minister's mansion. And so finally, his corruption was so bad that they did something about it. And they found that he had taken millions of dollars in bribes from Siemens, the German company, to throw, it was a submarine contract their way. And he was arrested, his wife was arrested, his daughter was arrested, his son-in-law, they had been spreading the wealth.
Yeah.
And he's sentenced to life without parole. Okay. Then they let him out 2 years later, and they said, oh, he's an old man. He served his country for all those years honorably. He made a mistake. Well, okay, what about the $6 million house that he bought? Well, what are we going to put him in the street? He can keep the house. All right. So 2 years later, they're all out of prison. He's still in the giant house. And it's like, everybody forgot about it or forgave it. And for the Greeks, like the man on the street Greeks, they would just shake their heads and say, well, that's Greece.
Does that remind you at all, John, of what's been going on in this country in the last few months with
Isn't that the truth?
January 6th, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, think about it. Yeah. And I'd like to ask you, so can you talk at all about what were you doing in Greece? Were you involved in these kinds of deals where you're bribing people?
No, thank God. I would be so ashamed if I had to tell you, yes, I was in counterterrorism operations. So my job was to work with the Greek intelligence service and the Greek police to disrupt. At first, it was Arab. It was Abu Nidal and the Libyans and the PFLP and the DFLP. And then it became very specific to the Greek groups: Revolutionary Organization 17 November, Popular Revolutionary Struggle. So we're jetting around Europe interviewing old men who used to be in the Red Brigades and Action Direct and Bader Meinhof gang. And you remember those groups from the 70s. They were all old men by the time I got involved. But no, if I had something to do with economics, I would be so ashamed of myself today.
What about, I'm not going to go there. Forget it. But isn't Greece one of those places where the CIA has some black holes, some places where they interrogate people?
No. Oh my God. Thank God for that too. Another thing I've become a Greek citizen, I should add.
Oh,
yeah.
Excellent. So you speak Greece.
Yeah, I speak Greek. I got my citizenship. My kids all have Greek citizenship.
You're so lucky.
You know what? To tell you the honest to God's truth, I had it in the back of my mind that if I needed to bolt one day, I ought to have the proper paperwork to do it.
Yeah, I was in Greece about 2 years ago, and just I love Greece. I spent time there when I was an economic hitman too. But we went to a bunch of the islands, and you can't beat the history and you
can't beat it. I wanted to tell you too. I was in Argentina. I'm going to say I was in Argentina 22 or 23 years ago. You had warned about the likes of Elliott Associates, one of the big hedge funds based in New York. And the reason I bring up Argentina is that Elliott bought millions, maybe billions of dollars in Argentine government bonds, which were essentially junk bonds. And Elliott demanded repayment, and it literally pushed Argentina into bankruptcy. So I wanted to ask you on a broader level, what's the role of hedge funds in some of these terrible economic stories, these terrible stories about the loss of economic sovereignty? And should individual banks and investment houses have that kind of power and authority over a country?
Well, I don't think they should. But the question is, what do we do about it? Yeah, the idea of the vulture funds, there's a whole huge business in that of going into countries like Argentina and many others and buying up these securities or other forms of debt that are basically downrated to nothing, to zero, essentially, and then demanding that the country repay them. And it's a crime. It's a crime. But how do you prevent these things when you've got these massive governmental institutions in both countries, the United States and Argentina, backing them and going along with it and playing a role in it? Probably what Argentine politicians were benefiting from this, we don't know, but I suspect there were few that were doing that.
Imagine.
Argentina is such a prime example of an incredibly amazing country with
Incredible place.
wonderful resources and culture and great restaurants.
Great, amazing, world-class restaurants. That was the first time I had been to Argentina, and I remember even on the first day just looking around and saying, wow, I could live here.
Yeah.
And then you learn what a corrupt economic basket case it is.
Oh,
and then you have to ask yourself, how do these poor people survive?
Yeah,
it's just
that's it. And yet they survive. They look great. They're very fashionable. And I remember being there in the '70s when the military junta was, and I was there with the U.S. Major General who was the senior vice president in my company, Charles T. Maine, and we were there together because Maine was deeply involved in the design and construction of a huge hydroelectric project that was on the Paraná River between Uruguay and Argentina. And, there were these roadblocks all over the place. You drive along, these guys would jump out at you with a roadblock with these automatic weapons pointed at you. And I felt I was fortunate to be there with the U.S. Army general, frankly. And, he had all of his credentials. So he was retired, but they respected that. And we were working with the junta in an indirect manner through the Inter-American Development Bank and the World Bank and the IMF, who were all involved, as was the U.S. government, supporting that terrible government. And we were doing something similar in Chile and throughout Latin America and a lot of the rest of the world. It was outrageous when you come right down to it. And that sent Argentina into a tailspin. It already had gone through the whole Perón. It's been going through problems for a long time, but I think that decade of the '70s was such a monumental moment in the history of Argentina and so much of Latin America. And the Argentines were deeply connected. There were a lot of rumors, which I can't prove, that the CIA would call on their counterparts in Argentina to do that dirty work in Latin America, so the CIA didn't actually do it. That's one of the allegations around the alleged assassination of Omar Torrijos of Panama that was actually done by the Argentines. None of this can be proven, but there's enough people feeling that way that you got to suspect there's some truth around it someplace. And you probably know more about that than I do.
I believe those stories, to tell you the truth. Because I know how the CIA operates. And one of the things they taught us in training, and we came to see it kind of as a bad joke, was always let others do your dirty work.
Mm-hmm.
Always. So you have at least plausible deniability. Why would you want to kill Omar Torrijos when you can get the Argentines to do it?
Right.
Why would you want to go after Chilean leftists when you can put Pinochet in power and have him do it?
Right.
It's sick.
Yeah.
But it's a fact of life.
Well, it's the story of empire.
Yes, it is. That's exactly what it is.
It's been done throughout history. And I think this gets us to, I'm often asked, so what's the big problem? Yeah, I talk about how we have a death economy, an economic system that's consuming and polluting itself into extinction. We have the opportunity right now to move into a life economy, an economy that uses solar and wind and, regenerates destroyed environments, plants trees, and so on and so forth. And people ask me, so what's the biggest thing holding us back? And my answer is leadership. That the world's leaders don't want that. And we're seeing that very clearly in the United States today, but we're also seeing it in Russia and in China and in Argentina with Milei. I mean, he's in that same category. So I think that's and throughout history, you look at leadership as always the controlling factor. And at the early stage of the United States, I think it's a very mixed bag, because my dad used to say, and my dad was a fairly conservative Republican, but he used to say, the American Revolution just replaced the monarchy with an oligarchy in the United States, and George Washington was part of that. But Washington also, I think, was a guy with great integrity, and he denied serving a third term. They really wanted him to. Because they said, no, I want to set a precedent. The president should not be president for more than 2 terms. I think we were lucky to have that kind of leadership at the beginning, despite its faults. But things have gone downhill.
Very much so. Could you have even imagined 20 years ago that there would be an American worth $444 billion? How does an individual in a lifetime accumulate $444 billion of wealth other than by stealing it or making it on the backs of all other Americans?
Yeah.
Now, I understand Jeff Bezos had this great idea to sell books online, but is Jeff Bezos really worth $400 billion? Elon Musk signed a new contract, a couple of weeks ago, in which he got a $46 billion signing bonus. What's that? And here we are 50 years after these economic problems cropped up, as an example, in Argentina or in Chile or in Brazil even. And 50 years later, they're struggling with exactly the same problems. And on top of those problems, just like we have here in the United States, much of the wealth is concentrated in the hands of individuals.
Few individuals. Yeah. But the other thing, John, I think it's important, and you with your history with the CIA, to really look at how the United States is playing into the hands of China now. So this we all the things we're talking about were done to create an empire that was supported by the United States and all these big corporations. And you and I both were involved in this process. A lot of money was spent on this from after World War II, especially after World War II, going on through all these decades. And yet today, it's all being torn down. And China's been on the rise anyway. But we made a lot of mistakes before this particular time in history. We devoted so many resources to Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, we pretty much ignored Africa and Latin America. China moved into Latin America and Africa.
It did successfully.
But now in the most recent times, I mean, to impose 50% tariffs on India, where do you think India's going to turn to?
Exactly. The Indians have robust trade relations with both China and Russia.
Yeah.
If they can't sell their goods to the United States because of 50% tariffs, no problem. They'll just go to their new markets.
Right. So, we're so playing into the hands of China. It's well, we'll have to see where this is all taking us. And from a real human perspective, the biggest problem is that all of us, whether we're in China or the United States or Russia, are ignoring the real existential threat to humanity, which is, an economic system that's destroying us. It's causing climate change. Climate change is a problem, but it's not the problem. It's a symptom of a much bigger problem, which is this system that's based on maximizing short-term materialistic consumption, and for corporations, short-term profits. And the corporations ought to run the world basically with this goal of maximizing short-term profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. So so that's the bigger problem, and the Chinese buy into that same sort of scenario. The Russians do. We do. Basically, everybody does. And that to me is the shame of what's happening now, is that we're all being so distracted from that real existential problem by these created problems of antagonism between countries. Like, come on, we're all living on this planet,
Right. We all have a vested interest in success.
Yeah. The planet doesn't see the borders. We know that from the pictures we take from satellites. I mean, if you go to Google Maps, you'll see the borders. But if you go to really a bigger picture of the world, there are no borders.
That's right. That's right. John, let's say a country like Portugal or Ireland or Tunisia has a great deal of economic instability, right? They've got a refugee crisis, energy prices are high. They need to get back on track. So they turn to John Perkins for advice. What kind of advice would you give, presuming that the advice wouldn't be to, make an appointment with the World Bank, the IMF, and Wall Street? What would you tell them?
So what are they looking for me? Advice is to do what?
Their economy is suffering because they've got high debt.
Right. Okay.
Manufacturing is off. They have a refugee crisis. Pretty much what we're seeing all over Southern Europe and Northern Africa.
Yeah.
What would you tell them to do?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's to form alliances with other countries that are in similar dire straits, and actually leverage this competition between China and the United States to get much better financial conditions, loans, better terms and conditions for loans. They need money in order to develop these things. They need markets, but if they can come together, I recently was on a program out of Africa and was asked that same question. What advice should I give the Kenyans? And it's like get all the African countries together. You've got more resources than anywhere. You're the richest continent in the world from a resource standpoint, and the poorest from an economic standpoint. But you've also got the youngest population in the world. I think the average population, the age of the average population right now is 19. And China recognizes that, and China's getting older people. They want to involve Africa more because they know they're going to need the young people to subsidize the older people of China. So get together on this and stand up, form alliances. And, I think that's the only way this is going to work is if these countries in Latin America and Africa, there's a long history that makes that very difficult for them to do. I understand it's got huge obstacles, but that would be my advice, that you've got to do that and then get the money to come in and make sure you get value added. That if you've got all these mineral resources, in Africa, you've got incredible amounts of things, lithium right now, which is such a huge thing, and cobalt and other things, and make sure that you get money to build the industries there to process these materials and make the products from them, the batteries, whatever it is, so get the value added. And the only way you're going to really make that happen is if you guys unite and stand up to the world. And incidentally, China recognizes that, and that's where the BRICS Bank comes in.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to ask you, is BRICS the start of a solution?
Well, BRICS appears to many people in those countries as allowing them to move in that direction. You've got a big, major power player in the world, China, that can help direct you in this direction. But the problem, of course, is that China's goals are probably very similar to the United States, and that's to build their own empire and have control over these things. So, it maybe lights the way in that you need to unite. I don't think it's quite as important. BRIC stands for Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, and China. China and South Africa. Maybe that's a little bit too diverse. What I think, if the African countries could form their own union and the Latin American countries their union, and then you could stand up to both China and the United States, and you could leverage, we're going to go to China. China's only going to require a 2% interest rate, and the United States is requiring 7% or, something. And so then you get this competition, but united. United we stand. It's one of the reasons that the United States has been so successful is that we have been united on many, many policies ever since the Civil War.
And isn't it interesting that Muammar al-Gaddafi, who would have agreed with everything you just said, and actually was promoting African unity, he had turned away from the Arab League and was promoting African unity, was taken out by the West.
It's symbolic, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
And
let's not forget that he was threatening to use the gold dinar as a currency for buying oil.
That's exactly right.
And you don't survive an attack on the U.S. dollar.
No, and that's
he didn't. Saddam Hussein didn't, and others haven't.
That's right. John, what are the major economic mistakes that countries are making today in their economies? Is it a failure to diversify? Is it taking on too much debt? And how can countries begin to protect themselves?
Well, again, your diversification question is an important one because again, if you go to China with its idea of the new Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative, it is saying to the world, look, you don't need to diversify. Do whatever you do best. Use the resources that you have, and we will help you get the value added from them by cooperating with other countries around the world. We'll help you build roads and railroads and ports and airports that help you trade with everybody. And they'll say, with the United States, if you get a most favored nation clause with the United States, let's say you're Ecuador, you have a most favored nation clause, and the United States says, oh, we'll have a great trading agreement with you. China goes in and says, no, you don't need to trade with us. We're going to help you build a new port and airports and roads so that you can trade with Argentina and with South Africa and with India and all over the world. We're going to help you expand all of this so you can really focus on the resources that you have best. And so, this whole idea of how do we maximize trade? How do we maximize resources? Again, you can go to the United States. We don't try to get every state to be self-sufficient. We say if one state has a lot of oil, let them produce more oil. And if another state is producing whatever eggs, let them sell eggs to the people producing the oil, and so on. I mean, we've been very strategic in this country about that between the states, but that model works for the world also.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
And China recognizes that. Again, China's using that. China's economic hitmen have just done a bang-up job. They've been so efficient. I found a great map here, if I can find it. There it is. That shows. So this is the year 2000. The United States was the number one trading partner with 80% of the world's countries, and this is the world 2020. China now is the number one trading partner with 80% of the world's countries. And it's gotten more, that's gone even more toward China in the last 5 years. This is the most recent one I have, but in the last 5 years, China has moved into some of these countries like Colombia, like the blue ones over here. So, I mean, that's so telling. That was in 20 years. 20 years. Right. Yeah. And how did that happen? Because China's economic hitmen are damn good at their job. I taught at an MBA program in Shanghai a few years back, and I realized as soon as I got there that why I was there was because they wanted to pick my brain about what mistakes I'd made and the successes I'd had and how to maximize the successes and minimize the mistakes, and they've done that.
But China seems like an exemplar. Are there any other countries out there that are doing it right?
Well, I'm not sure I would say China's doing it right, but what they are doing, if you want to say becoming an empire is doing it right, they are doing that right, for sure. And of course, they did have a 10%, roughly 10% economic growth every year for 30 years. They brought 900 million people out of dire poverty. Nobody else in the world has ever done anything like that. So yeah, they had a pretty successful model. And that also is an incredible selling point for their economic hitmen. You go to Argentina, you go to any country in the world, and you say, "Hey, look at our model. Look at the success we've had." In the meantime, look at the United States. Your federal minimum wage rate hasn't increased since 1973. Its minimum wage is the same today as it was in 1973 or 74. You want that model? And what kind of economic growth has the United States had? Nothing compared to us. So, these are all perceptions. But reality is molded by perception. And the Chinese are extremely good at selling the perception of what they do so well and what the United States does so poorly. And we played right into their hands, John, right into their hands.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. John, I wanted to wrap up by asking your thoughts on the U.S. economy. Good, bad, or indifferent. The data seem to be pulling us in different directions at the same time. And does it matter that we're almost entirely a service economy now?
Well, I wish I had a crystal ball to see where that's going to take us. But I don't think it's a bad thing to be a service economy as long as the world is structured in a way where international trade serves us. But as we move, the tariffs are doing the opposite of that. So they're putting us in a very difficult position where we can't afford to import the things that we don't produce here, which is an awful lot, you know, because we're not producing these things. We're not manufacturing them. And will this stimulate manufacturing in the United States as the administration says it will? I don't know. It might, but it's really hard to believe that most Americans, and while we're closing out the immigrants, most Americans really want to work in heavy industry. How many friends did you have at college that wanted to go and shovel coal? Uh, so it's hard for me to see how that's going to work. So I think being a service economy and a technological economy, one that can sell its technology around the world, could really serve our purposes. But it makes it very difficult to do that if you've got the kind of economic system that's being globalized today, where it's going to become increasingly expensive for us to buy things that we absolutely need from other countries and to produce them here at home. I don't know how that could become effective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Unless robotics come in to take the place of that, but
which would make it worse even.
It could make it worse, yes.
Yeah. John Perkins, thank you so much for being with us. John Perkins is the author of several books, but most famously, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Don't miss it. It's been out for a long time, and it's still in print, yes?
Yeah, there's a third edition. So it's a trilogy. So there's a third edition which focuses on on China's economic hitman strategy.
Fantastic.
And that's in audio and print or whatever you want. And John, I would just like to end by saying to your audience, we've talked about a lot of negative things, but I think we should all feel blessed to be alive at this time because we are at a cusp in human evolution. We are at a time when we are really going to define what this world looks like for our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It's a huge opportunity. And the fact we're exposing the bad sides of what we do, it's important. It's important to be self-critical, but it's also important to look to the future and see that we can turn this around. And I think, everybody who's listening to your program and who's alive now should feel blessed to be alive at this time and to be able to participate in this. I do. I feel very blessed to have this opportunity.
I agree with you. I do as well. Thanks again for being with us.
My pleasure, John. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you.